Hi, I'm Carrie Furrow. I'm an MPA candidate here at Virginia Tech, and today I'm going to be presenting NOAA Science versus Politics. So, the agency that's the main focus of this presentation is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So, this is a federal agency that should solely be based off of science for the work that they do. So, with this agency should have a high standard of scientific integrity. They should have high credibility, and they should be making ethical decisions that protect the people, the environment, and the economy of the United States. So, their mission statement is on the screen to the right, and their main focus and their missions are on science, service, and stewardship in that order. So for this presentation today, I'm going to be talking about a problem that this agency is facing, and that's political interference with science. So just to note, it has been recorded that Trump has attacked science over 100 times during his administration, but this is not something that's new and something that just he has done. In the past, for example, the George W. Bush administration had 98 documented attacks on science. So the next couple slides are going to be specific examples of when Trump has interfered with science in this NOAA agency, and then I will talk about the implications of these situations. So the first one is what media outlets have named Sharpiegate. So this has to do with the National Weather Service, which has historically been apolitical. So their main goal is to provide the most accurate weather information to keep people safe. So in September 2019, Hurricane Dorian was heading towards the United States as a Category 5 storm. The National Weather Service issued out a warning stating that Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia would all be affected by this hurricane. As you can see in the top right of the screen, this is Trump at a press conference where he has a printed out model of the hurricane, and it looks as if in the top left corner of the model, he has drawn with a Sharpie on the model and included Alabama. He then tweeted out, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama will most likely be hit much harder than anticipated, which was a very false claim and was not based on science at all. The National Weather Service then tweeted out in response to make it very clear that Alabama would not be hit by the hurricane. Well, this situation got really murky really quick for the NOAA leadership because while their scientists were in the field doing what they could to protect the people, they were also receiving pressures from the White House because they did not want to take back their false claims. So instead, what NOAA leadership did was they forced the National Weather Service to realign their projection of the hurricane to match Trump's false claims, and then they could return to their original findings. So this next situation is one that I named Changing the Mission, and it has to do with the acting administrator who gave a presentation at a Commerce Department Vision Setting Summit, and this was pertaining to the mission of the NOAA and what he would like to change it to. So there were two notable changes to talk about that he presented. The first one, the previous mission statement stated to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, while the new mission statement wants to say to observe, understand, and predict atmospheric and ocean conditions. The second notable change was that the previous focus was on healthy ecosystems, communities, and economies that are resilient in the face of change, while the new mission has a focus on a safe, secure, and growing economy empowered through accurate, reliable, and timely environmental information. So these changes were immediately criticized. It was very notable that they deliberately left out the word climate in the mission. And it's also very notable that this new mission statement matches up with the Trump administration's plan to have short-term and economically focused goals. So the acting administrator received many criticisms, as I said, from this, and he even made a comment back that this was merely just a draft and it was open for debate. but many people knew that that was not his intentions. His intentions were to line up with the Trump administration's goals. So at the end of the day, and after some interference with Congress, he ultimately stepped back from these changes, but the damage had already been done because it was already noticeable that the administrator of this agency could be easily influenced by politics. So the next situation I'm going to talk about is the political appointee that Trump had for that administrator of the NOAA. So nominations for this position have really never been contended until now. So Trump's nomination was a man named Barry Myers, and his background is very important because he is the former CEO of AccuWeather, which is a for-profit weather company that directly competes with the National Weather Service. So during his time as CEO, he also lobbied for the National Weather Service Duties Act of 2005. This act ultimately failed, but if it would have been approved, it would have required NOAA to privatize all of its data so companies like AccuWeather could stay competitive. Um, During his time at AccuWeather, he was also very vocal about not believing in climate change, and he even wrote several articles as to why he thinks that climate change is fake. So another thing to mention is that AccuWeather was actually founded by his brother. And once Barry Myers stepped down from the CEO position to receive the nomination for the head of NOAA, his brother then took the CEO position. So this is still a company that he has deep ties to, and there's no guarantee that if he was the administrator for the NOAA, that he wouldn't have a secret agenda to be addressing. Um, Ultimately, he had to step down from his nomination due to health conditions, but while he was still the nominee, it was a 2-year long process where he was not getting voted in, and he was a very controversial person. So again, this is a situation where we can only imagine the implications of such a controversial candidate getting put into this leadership position of an agency that's so important. So the last situation that I felt was important to mention is just the fact that this has happened before with the George W. Bush administration. So George W. Bush was actually caught delaying, screening, monitoring, and editing all this scientific information that was flowing out of agencies like the NOAA. So specifically for NOAA, their credibility was in total shambles, and it took them a lot of time to build back up their rapport and the trust of the citizens of this country. So next, I'm just going to talk about the implications of each individual situations. So for the Sharpiegate instance, public safety was really an implication and put at risk in this and with this, you know, like I said before, NOAA spent a lot of time building back up their credibility, and in one singular tweet and one single instance, their credibility is starting to crumble at its cracks again. Um, I mean, in the future, when there are serious storms heading towards the United States and people have to make the life or death decision to evacuate or not, it's going to be that much harder for them when they're not 100% trusting the agency that's giving them this information. So ultimately, at the end of the day, like this lead agency in the field not being credible puts all of us in danger. Another implication of this is that it creates a culture of fear for the employees and the scientists of this organization, which again ultimately puts the public safety back at risk. But with this culture of fear, scientists are now going to be self censoring themselves, and they're going to be less reluctant to speak up in a time of distress because they don't feel that they have the support of their leadership. And to them, it could be changing to something more of they would rather protect their job than protect this community or that. So that is a huge implication of this situation that is currently still ongoing. The situation itself is over, but because of the way that it was handled, it has lasting implications for all of us. So for changing the mission and the political appointee, the implications of this are basically just that it could change NOAA as we know it, and it could basically destroy the entire agency. If we allow each administration to put their own twist on this agency that should be science-based, it's eventually going to be so far off from its core missions that it's not even protecting anyone anymore. Um, and it's just really, it can cause the demise of this whole agency, which would again put the public at risk. As far as it happening before, one huge implication that people were scared of was the collection and storage of data. The NOAA, being such a large agency, does have a lot of data collected, especially pertaining to climate change. And people were scared that that data was either going to be lost or deleted or hindered in any type of way. And that's something that not only affects just our generation, but it's going to affect many, many generations to come if they're not able to use this data that we've been storing to further research and to advance their thought processes their thought processes on upcoming events of the future. Um, so one good thing, however, that did come from the Bush administration was that NOAA was the first science-based agency to adapt a scientific integrity policy to their agency. And it's important to note that this policy was actually working very well up until the recent situations that have happened. So, as far as tensions with democracy, this really affects the administrative responsibility and the ethics of public administrators and their decisions that they're making. Every day, public administrators are faced with the decision of whether they want to act for their own agenda, act for the public interest, act for their loyalties or their leaderships that they may have. And their position is difficult enough without adding this political pressure from the White House, which makes it all that much more serious. Um, Another implication of this is the ethics behind it. Um, is that necessarily ethical to promote something that's a political decision just because it's what the president says, even though he's wrong, like in the situation of Sharpiegate? Like, was that necessarily ethical to stress out all of those people in Alabama when they don't know, are we getting hit or are we not? Because every couple minutes it was changing. Um, these situations and political interference in science-based agencies just screws up the entire bureaucratic system, especially that an agency like NOAA has and is operating in. So it's going to cause a lot of tension with their lower level employees who are now acting out, or they're not taking their job as seriously, or they're having more tension with their bosses because they see the leadership acting in a way that is against their integrity policy. And so now they think that it's okay to act against their integrity policy as well. So it just really causes issues all across the board. So for science-based agencies like NOAA, it's really crucial that politics stays out of the agency and the decision-making process, because their ultimate goal at the end of the day is to protect people, the environment, and the economy, and they're unable to do so when there is political interference. So to wrap this up, I'm just going to give the NOAA a couple recommendations on how they could deal with this issue moving forward. So the first recommendation would be more training. To me, this means that all of your employees should be getting an ethics and a scientific integrity training every single year. Now, I know that for some organizations, they have a training, but it's an online module and it's super boring, and people just do it for the requirement of having to, and they don't actually get anything out of it. So my recommendation would be a training, in the sense that this is something that their employees and their leadership go to every year. This is something that's fun. It's something that's interactive. It's something that the employees look forward to. And at the end of the day, they're taking something out of it. Every single year, they should be getting something else out of it to work towards their employees acting based off of science and truth instead of being influenced by an outside an outside force. So my second recommendation is reprimands. Um, trainings are great and their policies are great, but they can only go so far. And if there's not consequences to actions, then there are still going to be actions that are taken that are against those policies. So I feel that the leadership of NOAA that allowed politics to come into the agency should be forced to step down. And in the future, any employee or leadership position that breaks their integrity policy should be fired. There should be clear consequences so that it deters employees from acting out. My third recommendation is more broad scale, and it's really to get Congress on board. So there is a scientific integrity bill that has been introduced, and it's a nonpartisan bill that was introduced in March of 2019. So this is still in its introductory phase, but I think it's going to be key that we get Congress on board with this and get this bill passed, because it will protect science and it will protect scientists to freely communicate their findings and their research so that they don't have to deal with this government interference and they don't have to be scared of sharing this truth and this actual factual data that they have. So this is really just going to help address the issues in all science-based agencies, not just in the NOAA. So thank you for your time, and if you need to contact me, my email is below.